Thank you. Before we go any further, I actually want to thank Francois for giving his time today to record this. And Francois has been, probably out of all the people in this audience, besides the family, Francois is one of my oldest friends. And I just thank you for your commitment to, and just everything that you do, and all the support that you've given me over the years, Francois. Thanks so much. And then I want to introduce another friend to me, and this is also someone that's I've known for a long time now. So I started off as, I met Catherine. I used to be the official Miss Earth photographer. It was a tough job.
Someone had to do it.
Someone has to do those things. I mean, really. When you get to work with beautiful women, it does sort of stimulate you a bit more. But I want to introduce Catherine, and it's not only because of Miss Earth. I think it's Catherine's love for people in the environment, and that's probably what reaches out, and just the whole stationery drive thing. And thank you for bringing your stationery this morning. It's lovely. Thank you so much. So I'm going to hand over to Catherine. There's so much I could say, but one thing I do want to say. When I do Twitter training, I always start off with an egg. And there's that's your little icon when you start, and you've got the little egg. And then I show Catherine's picture, and I said, I hope as always that we hatch from this egg into this beautiful chick.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning. I've had to ask for a handheld mic because I'm Greek, so if you give me both hands free and I have my mouth I can talk, you'll be here until like 5 o'clock. So I had to limit the discussion opportunities with the hands, so I had to ask for the handheld, so thank you for that. My name is Catherine Constantinides, and I wear a few hats, so I'm going to just give you a little bit of a brief peek into the journey that I've had, and I hope that I leave you with some food for thought. How long do I have? About 10, 7 minutes?
Some more if you want.
Okay, perfect. I will just give you a few sort of pockets of story from the amazing journey that I've had in my life. And it's an amazing journey not because it's all been positive, but because the challenges that I've faced have made me who I am today. And I think from one challenge to the next, it's led to amazing opportunities and doors that have opened in places that I didn't even know there were doors. So I'd like to share that with you. My Twitter handle is, if you are tweeting, @ChangeAgentSA, and please remember the hashtag, gratitude to 100K. And basically, my journey started. As a young girl, I was always very entrepreneurial, and I think that spirit, I think that people are born with that spirit, and I think that's really important to remember, because we try to oppress that spirit some way. So I started as a young, probably 5-6-year-old, who would collect pistachio nut shells. And when I was little, they used to dye the shells so they were bright pink. I'd collect them, I'd put little pieces of press stick inside them, and I'd go to school and sell them to the girls as false nails. And the teachers weren't very impressed, but this worked, and I started doing all these little business things like that. I then went through school. I had great opportunities to travel a lot. I come from a very humble home and background and have an amazing support structure in my family, and my family allowed me to do really wild and crazy things that, well, weren't really part of the plan or the journey. But these crazy and wild things led to sort of me seeing light in windows that weren't even in the wall. When I finished school, I had the opportunity I started studying. My biggest dream was to become the first female president of South Africa. And that is something that I used to, as a young girl, write letters to our former president, Nelson Mandela, and I got many responses back from him in person. He was an absolute, really someone who inspired me, as he does millions and millions of people around the world, and it was a great opportunity when I turned 21 to receive an invitation from him to have tea with him before I went to the International Miss Earth, which started another journey and career. I was the first Miss Earth South Africa, and I represented South Africa at the International Miss Earth, which was happening in the Philippines. Before that, I never really even knew where the Philippines was. 2 years prior to that, while I was at school, 10 years ago, I was to cut a long story short, but just to give you a bit of insight, I went to Egypt. I was doing some work in Egypt, and I was part of I found myself part of a human trafficking syndicate where I got caught in a really difficult situation, had to find a way out. And as a young girl, I knew that there was probably very little chance that I would get out of the situation that I found myself in. However, I was going to make sure that even if I died trying, I'd find a way to get home. And 10 years ago, we didn't have these little gadgets that we all sit and sort of dive into every day, all day. So it was very difficult to communicate with my family back home. My passport was taken, I was locked up, and it was a really, really tricky situation. But I'm not going to talk about that because that's just to tell you about something that I've experienced. However, these negative things that have happened, I've never allowed them to define me or to be my story. They're a part of my story, but they will not be the story. And they'll not be the journey, or sort of the crux of the journey. So these are just little things, yes, really terrible things that have happened. Some of us can't afford to do things that we want to do, and those things are really traumatic to us. This was something traumatic to me. However, I learned from the situation. I grew from the situation, and I was lucky enough that I was as hard-headed as I am as a young girl to make sure that I found a way home eventually. I then came back to South Africa, and I was studying law at the time. After a year and a half of studying law, which I was absolutely passionate about and loved, as well as anthropology, unfortunately my bursary was taken away. And this was another really big challenge for me. And I think that it was the most difficult thing because I applied for 7 other bursaries and was not eligible for any of them. Unfortunately, I lost the first bursary that I was on for a year and a half because they didn't realize I was Greek. I don't know how because my surname's really long. And they realized that the bursary was actually meant for somebody who was from a traditionally disadvantaged background and was male. So I didn't fit those criteria. Nonetheless, I had to make a decision, and I had to find a way to do what I was really passionate about without a degree. And in the last 10 years, I've realized that I've probably led a journey that is more enriching than probably 10 degrees put together. I then started working and doing what I was passionate about and doing what I really loved and what spoke to me as a person. Despite all odds, despite having absolutely no money, I continued to formalize a company that I had started at school. My passion, as Richard said, is people, the environment. So I started a company where we were able to do small projects, events, take on different kinds of corporate branding and PR work in order for us to be able to do the community work that we were so passionate about. I found myself living in Cambodia, the Philippines, and Vietnam for quite some time when I was quite younger, working with the governments there and replicating the projects that we were doing here in South Africa. So something that I was passionate about and believed in and made sure that I was going to do everything that I could possibly do to make what I wanted to be a reality started getting momentum on an international level. And my time in Cambodia was quite something, and it's a time I'll never forget. I lived in the slums with families and tried to get children off of the border. The children living on the border are so poor in Cambodia that they don't even have the luxury of wearing underwear. So these little children run around naked begging for $1 a day. And if one child in the family can take home $1 a day, they're really lucky. Most of these children don't have parents. Most of them are brought up by grandparents because AIDS is very prevalent there, and most of the parents have died of AIDS. So you find a huge disparity between the age group of kids. So a family might have 5 children, but one might be 32, and the youngest could be about 7. So the problem is that we find, working in those kinds of communities, that a lot of the children, the younger children, want to replicate what the older children are doing. And most of the children in those families, because they're so poor, the families sell off their daughters at the age of about 12 or 13 into the sex slave industry in Thailand. So that was a huge problem, and we needed to address that problem. We then put together a community development program, and things that for me are success stories are when you find children 8 or 10 years later who make contact with you and tell you they've now finished school. And for me, that's a success. Those children, we had to force them to stay in school, and we did that by employing their grandmothers and making sure the grandmother would only have the job and keep the job if the children were going to school. And the school system there was for free, so they had to make sure the children were going. So we had this entire project that my sister and I spearheaded in Cambodia, and it still runs today. And now we're seeing the fruits of those projects. I then continued to work here in South Africa. I'm very passionate about our country here. And Ella Bella, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today, she is my sister. She's also the United Nations Youth Ambassador for UNEP, which is the environmental program. And she started working in schools in Soweto, in townships around the country, Khayelitsha, Diepsloot, etc. And she came home one day and she said, she's got a class of 40 children, no tables. They're sharing chairs. They're really little humans, so, two little bums on a chair. And they're sharing one pencil in the whole classroom, and the pencil's about this size. It took her about an hour and a half for every child to write down a few things that she had written on the board. From that, our stationery drive was born. And we said, so many of us have spare stationery. I'm sure we can all sort of put on our CV that we pen thieves, because somebody asks you to sign something, you sign a bill, you write something at the bank. How many of you actually go home with those pens? And at some point you find all these branded pens are sitting at the bottom of your bag. So we decided to ask people for stationery that they had that they weren't using. You then go to the corporate sector and you see that corporates for big events, etc., love branding stationery. But at least 40, 50 of these things are left behind after an event or a function or at the end of the year. If you open your drawer at work, so many of us have sort of like stationery we haven't touched all year. So we started doing the stationery drive, where we collect stationery and we'd ask people to give us stationery to make stationery packs. Our first year, we were able to give 70 children stationery. And about 5 or 6 years later, this year, and the one thing that we make sure we do with our stationery drive is we ensure that we give the stationery pack to each and every child individually in their hand. It's not delivered at a school, hoping that teachers or a principal will give it to them. We physically go and deliver to every child, which is a mammoth task, and Richard can tell you about that. And that takes us many, many weeks. But we'll run the stationery drive for schools where children are going into the education system without even a pencil. And for us, our belief is that pencils can draw 1,000 dreams. And what better way to inspire children to learn, to be a part of the education system, and to want something more for themselves than if they can actually write down and draw what they dream of, what they want to become. They are inspired by living up to those goals that they've set for themselves. So this year we were very, very honored to be able to reach just under 14,000 children, and that is in townships and rural areas. However, it is also in urban city areas where there are families who send children to public schools who cannot afford to even be there. So this is, we work closely with the education departments, different school principals, who will give us a list of maybe 20 children at a school who are really in need of stationery. They're the children who go home that afternoon and they take their school uniform off and they walk around in their pajamas or their underwear because they don't have extra clothes. They only have that school uniform and perhaps one other outfit that they might wear to church on a Sunday. So these are the kinds of children's lives that we touch with that stationery. Earlier in this year, when we handed out stationery, I want to share this with you. There was a child that we gave a box of, over the years we've learned that we need to ask people now for new stationery because people give us their rubbish as well and we can't sift through all of that. So we ask people to either buy stationery packs or to buy new stationery, and we'll then put the packs together. One child got a box of colored crayons, and I'm sure we have all more than once done all sorts of things with colored crayons. You find in restaurants, it's the most amazing thing. If you put, a piece of paper under the plates and you just put a box of crayons on that table, the adults will be the first to pick up the crayons and draw and graffiti the whole table. And it's a lot of fun. And we actually get enriched. It's sort of like a soul food, just drawing and being free and being allowed to just do whatever. We gave one child in their pack, they got a box of crayons. And it was the first time they'd ever seen a box of crayons. And when we were leaving, they asked if they should give it back. They thought that perhaps it was just for while we were there that they got to play with the crayons and use them. And you realize the need. We all have challenges, and we all could do with more money. We could all do with, more time and more of everything. But we don't realize that it's the little things that we can do for other people that are within our reach and within our means that actually can change the path and the journey of another's life. So if we can inspire children and if we can inspire adults, I think it's really important. It's better to build better children than to try and fix broken men. And that is such a critical thing. And for me, that is really, really important. As much as we work on the older men and try to fix them, it is really important for us to, to inspire children. Africa is very much a young continent. And within the next, by 2050, I think it's 2/3 of the entire world's workforce will be in Africa. And that's a really scary statistic and a really scary number. So we need to try to build young people and inspire people. For me, I think that if we can give of our time and of ourselves as human beings to another person, and we can inspire something within them that they want something better for themselves, we're going to have a better future. Because if people are aiming at better futures just for themselves, because they understand that they are worth more than the situations that they come from, we will have better nations, and we will be able to move Africa forward. I'm very, very passionate about Africa. I'm very, very passionate about moving our continent forward, making our continent economically viable and competitive to the rest of the world. And if we look at pockets of Africa and sort of the picture poster child of Ethiopia with that, is suffering from malnutrition, has got flies on its face, is in a very hot, arid area. These are the pictures that we have of Africa and the rest of Africa in our minds. And these are the kinds of pictures that the media depicts to the rest of the world. However, I've been very privileged to work in all sorts of parts of Africa. This year specifically working very much in Côte d'Ivoire, and which is in West Africa, formerly known as the Ivory Coast. And I just recently came back from Ethiopia. And I looked very hard for that poster child. And indeed, I found places where that poster child exists and where the media have taken that. But it is very interesting to see, it's about how you perceive a place and how you share that place with somebody else that will create that image. Somebody recently told me they saw a photograph of, I think it's an old picture of from Nazi Germany, and there was a soldier who was standing, and there was another soldier on the ground. They were wearing the same uniform, but the soldier that was standing had a gun to the soldier on the ground's head. He was on his knees, and he was praying. So one has to say, but why would he want to be shooting somebody who's from the same regiment, the same fighting on the same side? Why would he do that? And it's because that picture is cropped that way, and that's all you see. However, if you had to zoom out of that photo and somebody had to show you what was on this side of the picture, you would see that there's somebody else from a different side who's holding a gun to his head and is forcing him to do what he's doing. So the reason I tell you that is because the picture that we share with somebody else, which is our view, is really important. And that picture builds communities, builds nations, or it destroys communities and it destroys nations. And as people who are very privileged to have a meal on our plate every day, to have a house to live in, a car to drive around in, we need to think about the stories that we share with others, because it's those stories of our lives that we share with others that makes or breaks another's perception. And I think that we've got too many people telling broken stories about our country and about our continent. Of course, we have challenges. Who doesn't? You look at the politics of France or Germany, and they have severe problems that they're facing as well. Our biggest problem and the biggest thing that we face as South Africans is crime. It's not our political structures, because the chaos of our political structures you can find in other countries as well. And because we are not so exposed to others' political leaderships, we don't always see that. But we're very quick to judge ours. We need to address crime in South Africa? Absolutely. We must address education as well. But these are things that I think as each citizen, if we speak about things that we see and we talk about things that are out there, we are able to keep conversations going and to allow people to become more educated. And I think that's really important. So through the Miss Earth South Africa program, it's a leadership program, and this program aims to inspire young South African women to do good within their communities. So people think, oh, it's a beautiful woman. I'm glad Richard thinks all of the women are beautiful, because beauty is definitely in the eye of the beholder. So some people say, no, they're not beautiful, but that's not the point. The point is that their beauty comes from within. It is what they go back and do within their communities because of what they've learned. It's what they are inspired to do because of what they've seen. And that is, for us, the magic behind the Miss Earth South Africa brand. So we have young women who are amazing young women coming from different kinds of backgrounds. Our current ambassador, her name is Ashanti, she comes from a village in Butterworth in the Eastern Cape. And if you've been to Butterworth, or you know the Eastern Cape, you'll know that Butterworth is a very, very poor area. So she comes from very humble background as well, and she is an amazing young woman, and she's really, really doing something really good, not only for the communities that we work in, but being a spokesperson and speaking to others, inspiring people to understand that despite all the challenges that she's faced as a young woman, she's able to do good in other people's lives. And that for us is the magic of the Miss Earth ambassadors. They go out and they're able to share their stories, share the education that we have taught them, and they go and make a change. We're very passionate about climate change and all sorts of things, and people will label us as bunny huggers, but that's fine. Bunnies are really cute, I don't mind hugging them. And tree huggers, and we love trees. We're big tree huggers. So we've planted 22,000 trees in the last few years, and for us, that's a huge thing. If we can allow a child to read a book under a tree, as opposed to sitting in the sand under the scorching heat, that is awesome. You know, if we can get kids that understand the value of trees, of the environment, and they're inspired to actually look after the water that is in their areas, then we've done something positive. So it's a vehicle, and people are attracted to something that they can see, and people form perceptions of what they see before somebody's even opened their mouth and been able to tell you who they are or what they do. And that's just how we're wired. That's just human nature. So we've used this vehicle to make sure that we're able to really, really touch lives, inspire people, and get people motivated to go out and do something good. In Ethiopia, I was really, really struck by the way that these people, I've never in my life ever seen physical manual labor in the way that these people work. I think that, who of you have been to Ethiopia? Okay, well, that's great, because then I'm sharing something you don't know. I'm sure Ethiopia is about 70 years behind South Africa in infrastructure and development. And that's a long time. I don't even know how long 70 years is. But it's really, really behind. However, they have one of the 7 most powerful emerging economies in Africa, which is amazing. And I don't know how that works out, but it's because of the agricultural investment that they have in their country. Nonetheless, if you go north outside of Addis and you go to the communities and you go to the villages, you see people who think of something, want to do something, and are going to do it. They don't have cars, bicycles, or any form of transport. The only transport they have is the 2 legs at the bottom of their body. So if they want water, they're going to walk up and down the mountain. Strapped to their back is a ceramic pot, which is probably about this high and probably weighs more than they do. And it's strapped to them. Somebody's obviously tied it around their body with thick rope. It is unbelievable to see little children you see the pot before you see the children, walking up and down the mountains for water. If you look at the fields and you look closely, you see little humans running in the fields and herding the cattle and harvesting the different things that they're growing. And it's unbelievable to see that human capacity to actually do physical hard labor, because we don't see that. Yes, people carry water on their head here as well, and people walk very far to just go to school. But anything that these people want, if they want to build a house, they need to go and fetch the rocks, and they need to go and build the house. And it's amazing. It's almost as if there's a time lapse. In Ethiopia, today is the 30th of November. So in Ethiopia today, it is probably, I could be mistaken, give or take a few days, it's probably around the 18th, 21st of November, 2006. They go to a different calendar as well. Ethiopia is the only country in Africa that was never colonized. And I think that's another conversation all in its own, because should we have colonized countries or shouldn't we? And there's a perfect example. So there are people across our continent who need our help. The Stationary Drive for us is a very special, very important campaign, and we thank you so much for being a part of that campaign. To Richard, thank you so much for allowing this gathering to support that initiative. So we've got schools that line up and ask for a donation of stationery, and that's inspiring. For people to really value what you're doing is really encouraging. So we'd like to invite all of you to join us at one of the handouts, and you can follow the Miss Earth Twitter handle at @MissEarth_SA, and you'll be able to get those updates and venues and schools that we'll be going to during the course of January and February next year. But we thank you so much, and if there's anything you need, Richard is your go-to man, and he'll be able to give you any details. But thank you so much for allowing us to be here. And just to sort of bring my story back to the beginning, even though I couldn't study and do exactly what I wanted to do, I think that it's more important to find what it is that inspires you and find what it is that moves you and go and do that, because what the world needs is more people to be doing what they want to do and what inspires them. Because I've been very privileged to have amazing opportunities and to have done things that I never would have, and that were never part of the plan, but I've been able to do those things because I've done what really truly talks to who I am. And I think, and you know, if you go to bed at night and you can sleep well, not thinking, oh, I wish I could do this or I wish I could do that. It's about going out and doing those things and making sure, against all odds, it's okay if we fail. And we don't realize that as human beings, failure is actually not on the grid. We just don't allow ourselves to fail. But it's that failure. I'd rather be 75 and have failed at 1,000 things than not have tried 1,000 things that I could have had that experience. So I could carry on, but I'm going to stop now. Thank you so much. It's been an honor to speak to you. And thank you so much for supporting us, and continue to do so. And please, be safe on the roads this festive season. It's really important for us that we see you all again at the next event, and continue to do what you each do in your own space, because I think if each person is doing something great and inspiring those just around them or keeping them in check, that's important, and we need those people. And I'd like to just end off and just say a very special hi to Jodine, and a very special thank you to Richard, because this is a man that has been part of my journey for a very long time. And some of the challenges I've faced and all of the things that I've gone through, and there have been many of them, there are amazing people that you find throughout your journey that will always be there, and they're not there for the glamour and the fame. They're there because they're true people, and those are the ones you have to hold on to. Hold them, I tie them to trees. So, make sure that you keep them around and you let them know as well how important they are to you, because life's really short, and you learn the hard way that somebody can be here today, and tomorrow they're not here. So thank you so much, and it's really, really been a privilege to chat to you and to tell you a little bit about my crazy life. And to Richard, thank you for all that you do. It is always such an honor and a privilege to be involved with you and to be associated to somebody who is so inspiring and does so much for people in all sorts of fields and spheres. So thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Catherine?
I'll stand in the light.
I
Yes.
was very interested in your comments on the media
Yes.
and the post-child. So what do we do to turn all of that around, given the fact that it is a tool which the media deploy very effectively around certain gains? So how does the average person join the equivalent of your thought army and march in a different direction?
Thank you for that question, because I think it's a really important question. It is really important for us to to speak about the things that we do see, to speak about, we can have this conversation here and we can leave here and never speak of it again. However, if there are 30 odd of us that go out and continue that conversation with another person and plant a seed, that person will then in turn at some point think of something and share it with somebody else. As we travel across specifically our country and our continent, we need to be proud of being South African. If we're not proud of being South African, there's a problem, because then we shouldn't be here. We need to go and live in the UK, Australia, Canada, or wherever it is that we feel comfortable. But if we're proud to be South African, we need to talk about being proud to be South African. We need to make sure, of course, we have our challenges and we mustn't be blind to those, but it is imperative that as South Africans and as we, in virtue of being South African, are African. Doesn't matter where our heritage is. If you are born here and you are living in this continent, you are African. And we have the right to speak about what it can be as basic as we are privileged to have the wildlife, the beautiful sunsets and sunrises that only Africa has. And it is important for us to take note of those things, to be inspired by those things, share that inspiration with others. If you're on Twitter, on Facebook, post a picture of, the monkeys that ate your food while you're in holiday in Durban, whatever it might be. We need to share those positive stories, because we do too much moaning and we forget to celebrate the positive stories. And yes, we all are victims of crime, or we know somebody directly linked to us that's a victim of crime. And those are unfortunate, but we need to make sure that we are active within our communities, within our municipalities, and that now when it comes to elections, and here's my election stance, all the young people here who have not voted, it is your responsibility to register now in February, if you haven't registered, and it's your responsibility as citizens of our country to vote. And that vote is going to making sure we have a stronger opposition or we have a stronger leading party. And it's imperative that we ensure that we all cast a vote. Because if you don't vote, you have no right to say a single thing about anything that is happening in our country, because you have not been active by participating in our democracy. And perhaps our democracy has failed us. Perhaps we need to also think about, as we move towards 20 years of freedom next year, we need to think carefully and have the conversation about democracy versus freedom. We are not a free nation. We are very much a traumatized nation. However, in the trauma that we find ourselves in, because we're victims of crime, because we go into our house, lock our doors, put on our alarms, make sure the fence is on, make sure that the beams in the garden are on, and all of this, and that's our norm. We need to have those conversations. We need to be participating actively within our communities in order to hold our leadership accountable and to hold our structures accountable to do better for us. If they don't have anyone to be accountable to, because we're just passive participants within our communities, they're not going to do better. They're not going to feel like they need to move the bar. And that is imperative. We need to be more active as citizens of our communities on a very local municipality level. And then furthermore, we need to celebrate the successes of our country. It might even just be you have a family of 5 boys and they're all fantastic at rugby. Fantastic. Celebrate that. We are great sportsmen. We need to make sure that we talk about those positive stories and that we start depicting a different kind of South Africa and a different kind of Africa. Because we also are so scared of other African countries, and we've created an unfortunate situation of xenophobia within our country. If you travel in Africa, they are petrified of coming to South Africa because of the way that South Africans are depicted at being very hateful to other African countries. And you look at these people, and they're so grateful for everything that you do, for the knowledge you bring, for the expertise that you have to share. And you realize that we're all actually fighting against the same enemy, but in different directions. And we need to make sure that, the bigger issues that we need to look at, especially if you're in industry, in construction, in development, etc., because we're going to wake up in 20 years' time and Africa's not going to belong to Africa. Africa's going to belong to China, and there will be a war between the Chinese and the Americans who are fighting for the land the very, very fertile and fantastic resources we have here as Africa. So if we don't wake up and start taking ownership and start being proud to being South African and being proud to be a part of a beautiful continent, an untapped resource of the world, we're going to have failed ourselves. We have amazing opportunity that lies ahead of us. And South Africa is at the forefront of that opportunity because of our development over the last 20 years. And if we didn't have the development that we've had in the last 20 years, we wouldn't be at the forefront of the economic development of our continent. However, we will always talk about the bad things that have happened in the last 20 years. We will always focus on the challenges that we face currently. So it's very much talking about the positives, being realistic about the challenges we face, but making sure that we're active and that we participate, that we vote, that we celebrate the wonderful things that we are privy to. People come here from the UK, they don't have a pool, they don't have a garden, and some of us live in smaller complexes, but we're privileged to those things. We're privileged to be able to, share a weekend and have a braai at someone's house. People in the UK don't do that. People in a lot of parts of the world don't have the opportunity to have space the way that we do. We must embrace those things. We just talk about the negative. And it's so much easier to talk about the negative because it's the norm and it's what people are used to listening to. So people are like, what are you talking about when you start talking about things that we should be celebrating? And there are many of them. We need to find them.